I'd like to talk about designing characters and what goes into, creating the art around your character. A little bit about what makes them tick, but also how they look and how that, tells us who they are and what their personality is. So when talking about character design, we're going to look at this through my lens, through how I design characters and the things that I find compelling. So when I'm trying to come up with an idea, I can't just invent something out of thin air. That is not how I work. I respond to things. In other words, I need inspiration. I need input to actually help me think through something. I also like bouncing ideas here and there so that I can talk through and hear myself talk about an idea. So it's important that brainstorming stage to figure out how you tick. Some people are just full of ideas. A friend of mine, Art Baltazar, he sits down in his sketchbook and he draws hundreds of characters as he sits and doodles and draws. I'm not that kind of artist. I don't have that ability. I admire that, but I don't have it. So what I do is I think about the stories that I find compelling and I try to think directly about what makes it compelling. Ninja Pig. Well, Ninja Pig is a story that came to me in middle school after I'd seen Ninja Turtles. Of course, uh, I was in middle school, so I was playing around in my notebook, and my sketches were always done when I should have been paying attention in class, I'm sure. But Ninja Pig sounded like an interesting, funny contradiction to me. Just like Ninja Turtles was kind of a wild idea, mashing up a ninja and a turtle, I thought Ninja Pig would be fun to play with. And so these are some early OG Ninja Pig sketches where I tried to figure out, okay, what he was all about. And I drew him dozens of times, just over and over again, until I finally settled on his style. Of course, you can see he inherited some of the features of the Ninja Turtles, the bandana, and so on. And most of the time, I drew him with nunchucks back then. Now, moving forward to today, I recently finished my first Ninja Pig graphic novel 30 years later, where I actually took Ninja Pig and put him into a story that I wanted to, craft that made him a little more significant. But this is my process for actually sketching and drawing Ninja Pig. Now that I have this character, I look for a pose and a posture to really come up with something dynamic. And I look at photo reference for that. I look at pictures of people in motion, action scenes. Of course, they're not pigs, but they're people. And so I get the gesture of their body. And I roughly sketch out in blue, typically now on my iPad, their posture and their action pose. And I rough it out. Then, once I have that done on a separate layer, working in my iPad now, I will sketch out a final line drawing of their body type and what they're doing. And that really helps me define, the posture, the character, everything I want. The line work is really important to me. And then playing around in my style with Ninja Pig, I wanted to give him kind of this halftone manga look with red and gray and wanted to play around with his style. So that's what ultimately led to this sketch, which turned into the cover of the new Ninja Pig book. Another book I did a while ago, a series that I started, was about Robin, a pirate panda who's on an adventure to figure out who she is. And she lives in a world of bears, and it's an adventure story about learning her true identity because she's the only panda bear in this world of bears. And so it plays on a few different ideas. I imbue it with some steampunk elements and some things that give it some technology and some history. Uh, and it was an illustrated novel. Now I intend to finish the story. Haven't gotten there yet, working on it. But the original idea for this came because I wanted to use the myth of Robin Hood in a new way. And so one of my favorite cartoons growing up was Robin Hood from Disney, and I loved the way all the characters were drawn as animals and the way it played around with the story. And so I thought, is there a way I can take that myth of Robin Hood and turn it into something else? And that's what I tried to do with my version. And then I thought, I want to put it in an animal world. And so that's where, pandas and bears came along. And so I mixed those together and came up with Pandemonium. So I wanted to define where she was from, what she wore, what she did, what's her motivation. All of that came into play as I developed her character and developed the ultimate story. And so that's something that I do when I'm creating characters and creating stories is I look for the inspiration of something and then I turn it, I twist it and make it my own in some way. So to help develop that, I have three W's for backstory. Here we go. Who? Who are they? The first W is who. Who's the character? And you can do this for each one of your characters. We need to define who they are, what their motivation is, where they came from, all the above. So, as an example, my series Super Siblings is about a brother and sister with superpowers. The brother is good, the sister is bad, but they don't know each other's secret identity and they've become rivals. That led to a lot of silly situations in comics that I illustrate, a couple different adventures that have come out, and it's always playing on these two characters. But I had to define who they were and where they came from. Illustrating that and showing that is an important part of developing your character. For example, if Conrad, the brother, is the goody two shoes, and the sister Courtney is the selfish little sister who uses her powers for bad, how do you show that in a picture? It's very important to show what character type and what personality they are and how they act. And so here we have Conrad reading his history book and Courtney lounging on the couch watching TV. And when we develop the second W, what is their history? Where did they come from? How did they get the powers? And so on. And again, in this case, what motivates Conrad? His motivation is to do good and to be a little Boy Scout, which led to his name, Scout. That's his superhero name. And then on the side, we have Courtney, who uses her powers selfishly. And so she's stealing some cookies at night. But what she has is her power turns her into a phantom so that she can be a ghost and sneak. And then when they're in their true hero forms, we've got that all-American truth, justice, and the American way Scout, and then Banshee, who's that sly, sneaky ghost that tries to get what she wants. Here, I wanted to show that again. They're fighting over the remote while at the same time fighting over the nuclear isotope. What could go wrong? The next W is where. Where do these events happen? For me, in my storyline, I put them in Bay City, which is an analog for any city in California or otherwise. But here I wanted to just have a location that was pretty. And for me, San Francisco is a pretty city. I love the views of the bay and the bridges and so on. And so that's where my story is set. And of course, that location becomes a story element. Here is one scenario where Banshee and Scout are fighting over some stolen toys that Banshee tries to take for her own nefarious purpose. But that causes a traffic jam on the main bridge. But mom and dad in the car are wondering, well, where did those superheroes come from? And later on, they return home none the wiser, not knowing that their own kids are the ones that caused the problem. Kind of like Clark Kent style, where it's so obvious that nobody knows who he is. All right, now that we've covered the three W's, let's talk about the three A's. Let's start with the design of the character, their appearance. Let's get into their anatomy. Shape language is really important when designing characters. This is a common design principle used by character designers, which is using shapes to develop a character personality so that that shape becomes the ultimate underlying anatomy for that character so that you recognize what kind of a character they are when you see that shape. Is it possible to convey personality without saying anything, but just with the way the gesture or the stance or the pose of that character? Also, their body type, can that elicit some of those interesting personality traits? Yes. And so use shapes in a way to tell the story, to further the story. Typically, we think of circles as a way to show kindness and warmth and softness. Squares are strong and sturdy and powerful. Triangles can be sharp and edgy and menacing. For my character, Courtney, she was going to be the pesky little sister. And so I thought that Stewie was an interesting character design, and I liked his head. And I thought, you know what, Courtney's going to have that kind of a head. So she has that shape that's inspired by Stewie, and she's very much like him, this diminutive little character that always tries to get what she wants. Conrad, on the other hand, was meant to be inspired by heroes like Clark Kent. So if you look at the curl on his hair, it's a upside, well, it's a upward angled curl instead of Superman's downward curl. And Conrad's curl kind of curls into the shape of a C. And that's intentional as a little hidden Easter egg into who he is. A little bit like Matt Groening put MG in the side of his design for Homer. Apparel. So first anatomy. Now we get into the apparel. They're cops. They're crop. They're costumes and they're props. So what do they look like? Well, he's a Boy Scout who wears a flight suit because he flies. She is a phantom who can sneak and get through different uh, get through walls and the other things that she does as a part of her character. So when it came to color, of course, he's red, white, and blue, and she's pink because every little girl loves pink. Next, we can talk about art style. Now, everyone is going to pick their own art style when developing their characters, and I myself have a few different styles that I like to use depending on the story I'm trying to tell. You can see with the um, the super siblings, to me, it's inspired by cartooning. And one of my favorite cartoonists was Bill Watterson with Calvin and Hobbes. And that kind of a cartooning style is the vibe I wanted for my characters and my story. So that's what that was. You can see that carried on in the way I do fan art and illustrations of other characters. I like to do this little comic strip style that is then you can see why he's got the white eyes a little bit like Calvin in the way that Bill Watterson used to draw. And so I do the same thing. I also work in traditional form. I love painting and illustrating characters. This is Red from Pirates of the Caribbean. When they changed her character, I decided to make a poster and a painting for her. And so this is a traditional painting, illustrated on canvas. I also like doing what I call my Disney style, where I like to take more realistic anatomy, but then imbue it with some of those Disney-fied features like larger eyes and rounded face and more exaggerated body types so that you can play up the personality and the acting of that character a little more than just your average realistic look. Here's that realistic look. I love the painterly rough style, and I thought this really aggressive look worked for Wolverine and Hugh Jackman. That was that inspiration for this style. And these are paintings that at one time I used to do on paper, but now I just do in my iPad. And then, of course, I like to work in a vector style. So I like doing a kind of a pop art, Patrick Nagel inspired style where I take a realistic portrait, but then twist it a little bit in that graphic look where it's simplified color and bold lines, creating that interest, that 80s pop art style for a character illustration. So what do you do? What's your favorite? What's the style that you like to work in? So you have those different elements that I've mentioned. The three W's, who, what, where, and then your three A's, which is anatomy, apparel, and appearance, right? Think about those things as you develop a character and develop your story, and you'll have fun. All right, see you later.